somewhere within the first 5 minutes of this match, I get concussed.
I never do that.
I don't even remember this night.
I feared him most. That's what The Undertaker said. And you'd never guess who he was talking about. For 30 years, The Undertaker was the man everyone else was supposed to fear. He was the Deadman, the Phenom, the guy who buried careers and ended legends. When his music hit, grown men looked nervous. When he walked to the ring, the whole building went silent. He was untouchable, unstoppable, a supernatural force that nobody could match. But here's the thing. Behind the black hat and the rolling eyes, Mark Calloway was just a man. And that man had his own fears, real ones. The kind that kept him up at night, the kind that made him watch his back in the locker room, the kind that reminded him he was human, even when he was pretending to be a ghost. This is the other side of The Undertaker, the side you never saw on TV. The fears he carried from his childhood all the way to his final match. Some of these fears were about getting hurt, some were about getting betrayed, and one of them is so ridiculous you won't believe it's real. But it is. All of it is. And it proves something important. The Deadman wasn't fearless. He was just brave enough to face his fears every single night. Let's dig into the 10 people who made The Undertaker afraid. 10. The Sheik, the childhood nightmare. Before Mark Calloway ever became The Undertaker, he was just a kid in Houston, Texas. A wrestling fan like any other. And like every wrestling fan in the 1970s, he believed it was all real. He believed the good guys were really good. He believed the bad guys were really bad. And he believed the Sheik was a monster. The Sheik was Ed Farhat, a wrestler who didn't just play a villain. He became one. He used fireballs. He used pencils. He used hidden blades to carve up his opponents until they bled all over the ring. And he didn't just do this for show. He wanted people to believe he was dangerous. He wanted them to be scared, and it worked on young Mark Calloway. One night, Calloway and his friends went to a live wrestling show. They were sitting near the guardrail, close enough to see everything, close enough to feel brave. They started yelling at the Sheik as he walked to the ring, heckling him, calling him names, just being stupid kids. Then the Sheik looked right at them. He didn't say anything. He didn't threaten them. He just lunged. That's all it took. One sudden movement toward the rail, and those kids scattered like roaches when the lights come on. Calloway and his friends ran so fast they knocked over an old lady in the row behind them. They didn't care. They just wanted to get away from the Sheik. They genuinely believed he was going to hurt them. Calloway described it years later. We got ourselves all psyched up. We're out there. We're out on the rail. They're about to come down. We start yelling at him, and he makes just a lunge at us. We damn near took out the whole row trying to run because we thought the Sheik was going to get us, man. We wiped out this old lady. We were hauling, trying to get out the way. Calloway never forgot that moment. It burned into his brain. The fear was so real, so intense, that it shaped everything he would later become. Because that's when he learned the most important lesson in wrestling. You don't need to touch someone to scare them. You just need to make them believe you will. The Sheik didn't chase those kids. He didn't have to. One lunge was enough. Years later, when Mark Calloway became The Undertaker, he used that same philosophy. The slow walk, the stare, the silence. He copied the Sheik's playbook. He learned that less is more, that fear comes from what you don't do, not what you do. The Sheik terrified him as a child, and that terror became the foundation for the character that would terrify millions. The primal fear planted in that arena in Houston became the blueprint for a persona that would last 3 decades. This wasn't just childhood trauma. This was the origin story of The Undertaker's entire approach to character work. Every slow, deliberate step down the aisle, every cold, emotionless stare into the camera, every moment of silence that made audiences hold their breath. All of it came from the lesson the Sheik taught him that night. Fear doesn't require violence, it just requires intent. 9. Bruiser Brody, the gatekeeper. By 1987, Mark Calloway wasn't a fan anymore. He was a rookie wrestler trying to make it in Texas. He was big, he was tough, but he was green. He didn't know the business yet. He didn't know how to protect himself, and that made him vulnerable. His very first match was against Bruiser Brody. If you don't know who Bruiser Brody was, imagine the scariest, most unpredictable wrestler you can think of. Now make him worse. Brody was a wild man, a brawler who refused to follow scripts. He didn't care what the promoter wanted. He didn't care what his opponent wanted. If he decided he didn't like you, he would just start fighting you for real. This was called shooting in wrestling. It means dropping the act and actually hurting someone. And Brody did it all the time, especially to rookies. So when Mark Calloway, going by the name Texas Red, found out he was facing Brody in his debut match on June 26, 1987, he was terrified. Not nervous, terrified. Because everyone in the locker room was scared of Brody. Brody, even the veterans. Lance Russell, the legendary wrestling announcer, said it plainly. There were a lot of guys in the locker room who were scared of Bruiser Brody. He was a bad dude. Brody had a reputation for testing rookies. He would hit them hard. He would throw them stiff. He would see if they could handle it. And if they couldn't, if they showed weakness or fear, he would destroy them. Sometimes he would just walk out of the match and leave them standing there looking like idiots. That's what happened to Lex Luger. Luger was a bodybuilder with movie star looks. But when Brody started shooting on him in a cage match in Florida, Luger panicked. He froze. Then he climbed out of the cage and ran away. Just left because he was too scared to stay in the ring with Brody. Luger realized eventually that something was up. He got scared that Bruiser would snap, so he just left the ring. Mark Calloway could have done the same thing. He was a rookie. Nobody would have blamed him, but he didn't. He stood his ground. He took the beating. He took the stiff shots. He took the pin. And when it was over, he had earned Brody's respect. That match was the trial by fire. It proved Calloway was tough enough to survive in the business. But it also taught him fear. The fear of the gatekeeper. The fear of the man who decides whether you're good enough to stay. The atmosphere in that locker room must have been suffocating. Here's a 22-year-old kid, barely trained, about to step into the ring with a legitimate madman. A man who had ended careers. A man who had made veterans quit the business. A man who could decide in the middle of the match that you weren't worth his time. And there was no backing out. Once you were booked, you went. Once you stepped through those ropes, you were at Brody's mercy. Calloway passed the test, but the fear never really went away because he learned something crucial that night. In wrestling, your toughness isn't measured by how hard you hit. It's measured by how much you can take and whether you're willing to take it without backing down. Brody didn't fear Calloway, but Calloway sure as hell feared Brody. And that fear made him better. It made him tougher. It made him the kind of wrestler who would never back down from anyone, no matter how dangerous they were. 8. Andre the Giant who could say no. When Mark Calloway was 8 or 9 years old, he met Andre the Giant. It was just a quick handshake at a show, but Calloway never forgot it. He said he was mesmerized by Andre, that he couldn't even describe how big Andre's hand was, that he was legitimately scared just standing next to him. I was mesmerized, Calloway recalled. Shook Andre's hand and you can't even as an adult, you can't describe how big Andre's hand was. I was legitimately scared. That childhood fear turned into professional anxiety when Calloway joined the WWF in 1990. Because by then, Andre wasn't just a giant. He was the boss of the locker room, the king, the man whose opinion could make or break your career. And Andre hated most big men. He thought they were arrogant. He thought they were clumsy. He thought they didn't respect the business. And if Andre didn't like you, he would bury you. He wouldn't work with you. He wouldn't sell for you. And everybody in the company would follow his lead. For the Undertaker, this was terrifying. He was a new character, a big man standing 6 feet 10 inches tall, and his entire push depended on Andre accepting him. If Andre said no, it was over. Simple as that. The power Andre held wasn't physical, it was political. He was the ultimate gatekeeper. One negative word from Andre to Vince McMahon, and your push would evaporate. One dismissive comment in the locker room, and the boys would turn on you. One refusal to work with you, and you'd be jobbing to mid-carders within a month. So Calloway walked on eggshells around Andre. He was respectful. He was humble. He made sure Andre knew he wasn't trying to step on anyone's toes. He deferred to Andre in every situation. He basically held his breath for months, hoping Andre would give him the nod of approval, and eventually it worked. Andre took a liking to him. Andre even told him, "Kid, I have an idea for us." Those words must have felt like a reprieve from a death sentence. Andre approved. Andre wanted to work with him. That meant Calloway was safe. Sadly, Andre's health failed before they could work together. Andre died in January 1993, and the dream match never happened. But the damage was done. Calloway had spent months in a state of low-level panic, knowing that one wrong move, one perceived slight, one moment of arrogance could end everything he'd worked for. This wasn't the fear of getting hurt. This was the fear of rejection, the fear of being told you're not good enough, the fear of being sent home before you ever got started, the fear that the person whose approval you desperately need will withhold it and destroy your career with a single word. Andre the Giant was a legend, but for The Undertaker, he was also a constant source of stress. The shadow of the Giant loomed over his entire first year in the WWF. And even after Andre passed, that fear, the fear of needing approval from those above you, never fully went away. 7. Hulk Hogan, the politician who lied. In November 1991, The Undertaker won the WWF Championship from Hulk Hogan at Survivor Series. It should have been the happiest moment of his career, the crowning achievement, the validation that he'd made it to the top. Instead, it became the moment he learned to fear his own partners. The finish of the match was simple. Ric Flair would slip a steel chair into the ring. The Undertaker would hit Hogan with the tombstone piledriver onto the chair. Hogan would lose. Clean, done. So that's what happened. The Undertaker grabbed Hogan, positioned him carefully, held him tight, and dropped to his knees. He made sure Hogan's head was nowhere near the chair. It was perfectly safe, just a visual trick. The chair was there for the audience to see, but Hogan's head never came close to touching it. But when Hogan hit the mat, something strange happened. He started convulsing. He grabbed his neck. He writhed around like he was in agony. He acted like he was paralyzed. Backstage, Hogan told everyone that The Undertaker had broken his neck, that the move was botched, that he was seriously hurt, that Calloway had nearly ended his career, and The Undertaker believed him. Calloway was devastated, absolutely gutted. He thought he had ended Hulk Hogan's career, the biggest star in wrestling history, the man who built the WWF into what it was. And Calloway, in just his second year with the company, had potentially paralyzed him. He thought he was going to be fired, or worse, sued, or even worse, blackballed from the entire industry. He spent days in agony, replaying the move in his head over and over, trying to figure out what went wrong. How could he have messed up so badly? Then he watched the tape, and he saw the truth. Hogan's head never touched the chair, not even close. The Undertaker had protected him perfectly. Hogan's head was safely cradled in Calloway's arms, suspended inches above the mat. There was no injury. There was no mistake. There was no botch. Hogan had lied. Years later, Calloway confronted Hogan about it. Hogan's excuse was pathetic. Well, brother, what it was, you had me so tight that when we came down, I had nowhere to move. It was nonsense. A complete fabrication. Why did Hogan do it? Several reasons, probably. To protect his reputation. To make it look like he only lost because he was hurt. To sabotage The Undertaker's momentum as the new champion. To remind everyone that he was still the biggest star, even in defeat. Or maybe just because he was Hulk Hogan and lying was what he did. Whatever the reason, it worked. Hogan planted doubt. He made people wonder if The Undertaker was unsafe. He took the focus off his own loss and put it on a fabricated injury. And The Undertaker learned a brutal lesson that day. The real danger in wrestling isn't in the ring. It's backstage. It's the guy shaking your hand while stabbing you in the back. It's the smile that hides the knife. From that moment on, Calloway trusted almost nobody. He became paranoid, guarded. He watched everyone. He questioned everything. Because if Hulk Hogan, the biggest star in the world, the man who was supposed to be a hero, could lie to his face and try to ruin him, then anyone could. This was the fear of politics, the fear of betrayal, the fear that your own team was trying to destroy you, the fear that the person standing beside you in the locker room was plotting against you behind your back. Hogan's lie changed Calloway. It hardened him. It turned him into the locker room enforcer he would become during the Attitude Era. It taught him that loyalty was rare and trust had to be earned, not given. And it planted a seed of cynicism that would define the rest of his career. 6. King Mabel, the clumsy monster. In 1995, the WWF was in trouble. Hulk Hogan was gone. Bret Hart was champion, but the ratings were falling. They needed new stars, new monsters, new threats for The Undertaker to conquer. So they pushed a guy named King Mabel. Mabel was Nelson Frazier Jr., a man who weighed nearly 500 pounds. And that was the problem, because Mabel wasn't just big, he was sloppy. He was clumsy. He was dangerous in the worst possible way. Kevin Nash and other wrestlers refused to work with him. They said he was unsafe, that he didn't know how to control his body, that wrestling him was like playing Russian roulette. Every move was a gamble. Every spot was a potential disaster. But The Undertaker didn't have a choice. He was the company man, the locker room leader, the guy who took the matches nobody else wanted. So when Vince McMahon told him to work with Mabel, he did it, and Mabel crushed his face. It happened during a match in 1995. Nobody remembers the exact move. Probably a leg drop, maybe a clothesline, maybe just Mabel falling on him wrong. But whatever it was, Mabel's full weight came down directly on The Undertaker's face. The orbital bone shattered, the cheekbone fractured. The pain was immediate and excruciating. The injury was severe enough to require surgery. The Undertaker was out for weeks, and when he came back, he had to wear a protective, phantom-like mask just to wrestle. The mask became part of his character for months, a constant reminder of what happens when you work with someone who doesn't know what they're doing. This was the fear of incompetence, the fear that your opponent doesn't know what they're doing, the fear that one mistake, one slip, one miscalculation, one moment of clumsiness could end your career, or worse, end your life. The Undertaker wasn't afraid of Mabel because Mabel was mean. Mabel wasn't malicious. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but that almost made it worse, because you can prepare for someone who wants to hurt you. You can see it coming. You can protect yourself. You can't protect yourself from someone who doesn't know how not to hurt you. Wrestling is built on trust. You put your body in your opponent's hands every time you step in the ring. You trust them to catch you, to hold you safely, to protect you while making it look violent. When that trust is broken, or when it was never there in the first place, the job becomes terrifying. And King Mabel broke that trust with every match he worked. He was a 500-pound liability, and The Undertaker paid the price for the company's desperation to create a monster. The irony is that they already already had a monster. The Undertaker was right there. But instead of building new stars properly, they threw an untrained giant at him and hoped for the best. The Undertaker's face paid for that mistake. 5. Shawn Michaels, the ego that could destroy everything. By 1998, Shawn Michaels was the best wrestler in the world. Pound for pound, move for move, there was nobody better. He could have a 5-star match with a broomstick. He was that talented, but he was also the biggest problem in the locker room. Michaels was addicted to drugs, he was addicted to attention, and he was addicted to being in control. He had a history of refusing to lose. He would throw tantrums. He would fake injuries. He would threaten to quit. He would do anything and everything to protect his spot at the top. The Montreal screw job had happened just months earlier. Michaels had been part of the conspiracy to screw Bret Hart out of the title. He'd proven he was willing to destroy the business to get what he wanted. So when WrestleMania 14 came around, The Undertaker had a serious concern. Michaels was supposed to lose the WWF Championship to Stone Cold Steve Austin. This was the match that would launch the Attitude Era. This was the match that would save the company. This was the match that absolutely, positively had to go according to plan. But what if Michaels refused to do it? What if he got to the ring and just decided to keep the belt? What if he went into business for himself and held the company hostage? What if his ego was so out of control that he destroyed the entire show? The Undertaker wasn't going to let that happen. So he taped his fist backstage. White athletic tape wrapped around both hands, knuckles exposed. The universal sign in the wrestling business that you're ready for a real fight. He sat in the gorilla position, the area right behind the curtain where you wait before going to the ring, and watch the match on the monitor. The whole time, he was ready to sprint to the ring and beat the living hell out of Shawn Michaels if he didn't drop the title to Austin. Years later, The Undertaker admitted it publicly. The whole time in my head, I'm like, I was gonna smash you if you didn't drop that belt to Steve. I was sitting there, hands taped, ready to do whatever needed to be done. Think about that for a second. The Undertaker, the locker room leader, the conscience of the company, sitting backstage with taped fists, ready to run to the ring and physically assault the WWF champion on the biggest show of the year. That's how little he trusted Shawn Michaels. That's how serious the threat was. Michaels did the job. He lost the title to Austin. The Attitude Era began. Everything worked out. Austin hit the stunner, got the 3 count, and the business changed forever. But The Undertaker's fear was real. He wasn't afraid of fighting Shawn Michaels. He would have destroyed him in seconds. Michaels was maybe 225 pounds. Calloway was 300 pounds of legitimate toughness. It wouldn't have been a fight. It would have been a beating. But that wasn't the fear. The fear was what Michaels could do to the business. The fear that one man's ego could burn the whole company to the ground. The fear that Michaels would refuse to lose, and the show would be ruined, and the Attitude Era would never happen, and the WWF would lose the Monday Night War to WCW. This was the burden of being the locker room leader, the constant vigilance, the need to be ready at all times to protect the business from itself, the fear that you might have to hurt someone to save everyone else. Michaels was a volatile genius, brilliant in the ring, poisonous outside of it, and The Undertaker spent that entire WrestleMania ready to end him if necessary. That's not respect. That's not admiration. That's fear of what chaos looks like when it wears wrestling tights. 4. Mick Foley, the man who didn't care if he died king of the ring. 1998, Hell in a Cell, The Undertaker versus Mankind. Everyone remembers this match. It's the most famous match in wrestling history. It's been shown on documentaries, highlight reels, and shock video compilations for over 2 decades. But for The Undertaker, it wasn't entertainment. It was a nightmare. The match started on top of the steel cage, 16 feet above the ring. The Undertaker and Mick Foley brawled up there, throwing punches, slamming each other into the chain link. Then came the moment everyone knows. The Undertaker grabbed Foley, lifted him up, and threw him off the cage. Foley fell 16 feet and crashed through the announce table. His body folded like an accordion. The impact was sickening. The crowd went silent, then erupted. Jim Ross screamed, "Good God Almighty! Good God Almighty! They've killed him!" But Foley got up. Somehow, impossibly, he got up. He climbed back to the top of the cage, and the match continued. Then came the moment nobody expected, the moment that wasn't planned. The Undertaker grabbed Foley and choke-slammed him onto the roof of the cage. The cage was supposed to sag. It was supposed to hold, but the zip ties snapped. The entire panel gave way, and Foley disappeared. He fell 15 feet straight down to the canvas below, and a steel chair that had been on top of the cage fell after him. It hit him directly in the face, knocking out one of his teeth and driving it up through his lip and into his nose. The Undertaker stood on top of the cage, looking down. From his vantage point, all he could see was Foley lying on the mat, unconscious, bleeding, convulsing, and he thought Foley was dead. "I was scared to death for a while, to be honest with you," The Undertaker said later. "I thought he was dead." Foley wasn't dead. Against all odds, against all logic, he got up again. He finished the match. He took more punishment. He got choke-slammed onto thumbtacks. And then finally, he lost. But that didn't make it better for The Undertaker, because he realized something horrible that night. Mick Foley had no regard for his own safety. He would do anything. He would take any risk. He would push any boundary. And The Undertaker was the one who had to facilitate it. He was the one throwing Foley off cages. He was the one slamming him onto steel. He was the one inflicting violence that could easily turn fatal. This was vicarious fear. The fear you feel for someone else. The fear that you're going to be the one who kills them. The fear that they're going to ask you to do something insane and you're going to do it and they're not going to get up. The Undertaker later admitted he was disturbed by Foley's unpredictability. Wrestling Foley was terrifying because Foley treated his own body like it was disposable. He had no self-preservation instinct, and that put an unbearable burden on The Undertaker. Because what if the next crazy stunt went wrong? What if Foley landed wrong? What if the table didn't break? What if the cage collapsed completely? What if Foley died in that ring on live pay-per-view with millions watching? And what if The Undertaker was the one who did it? That fear haunted him. It made working with Foley a psychological ordeal, because Foley was one of his closest friends. They respected each other. They trusted each other. But that trust was being pushed to the breaking point every time they wrestled. The Undertaker wasn't afraid of Mick Foley. He was afraid for Mick Foley. And that might be even worse, because you can overcome your own fear, but you can't overcome the fear that your friend is going to die, and you're going to be the reason why. 3. Yokozuna, the agile giant who wrecked his back. Yokozuna weighed over 500 pounds. Let that sink in for a moment. 500 pounds. More than 2 full-grown men combined. A mountain of human flesh. But unlike King Mabel, Yokozuna knew how to move. He could throw super kicks. He could run the ropes. He could drop kick. He could move like a cruiserweight trapped in a sumo wrestler's body. It didn't make sense. The physics shouldn't have allowed it. But Yokozuna made it work. That made him terrifying. The Undertaker had a long, brutal rivalry with Yokozuna. It lasted from 1993 through 1994 and involved some of the most physically demanding matches of Calloway's career. Most of it centered around casket matches. The goal was simple. Beat your opponent down, then stuff them into a casket and close the lid. Except when your opponent weighs 500 pounds, that's not simple. That's physically impossible. The Undertaker had to lift Yokozuna, roll him, drag him, shove him toward the casket inch by agonizing inch, night after night, match after match, house show after house show, and it destroyed his back. The human spine is not designed to repeatedly lift 500 pounds. The vertebrae compress, the discs bulge, the muscles tear. The Undertaker was essentially doing a strongman competition every time he worked with Yokozuna, except he was doing it in wrestling boots on a canvas-covered plywood floor. But the real fear wasn't the work. It was the banzai drop. The banzai drop was Yokozuna's finishing move. He would back his opponent into the corner, climb to the second rope, then jump and land his full weight on his opponent's chest. 500 pounds dropping from several feet in the air, all of it concentrated on the rib cage. Yokozuna was a professional. He was trained by the legendary Anoa'i family. He knew how to distribute his weight. He knew how to land safely. He was careful. But even so, the margin for error was zero. If he slipped, if he landed wrong, if his knee buckled, he could crush a rib cage. He could collapse a lung. He could stop a heart. The Undertaker said Yokozuna was scary, not because he was unsafe, but because the physics didn't make sense. A 500-pound man should not be able to move that fast, should not be able to jump that high, should not be able to land that precisely, but Yokozuna could. And every time he climbed those ropes, every time he jumped, the Undertaker held his breath and hoped Yoko's knees held up. This was the fear of the physical toll, the fear that the job is grinding you down, the fear that even when your opponent is being careful, even when they're doing everything right, the sheer reality of what you're doing is going to break you. The Undertaker's back never fully recovered from the Yokozuna feud. Those casket matches, those repeated attempts to move an immovable object left permanent damage. The pain became chronic, the injuries accumulated, and for the rest of his career, Calloway would be managing back problems that started with trying to lift Yokozuna night after night. Yokozuna was one of the safest, most professional big men in wrestling history, but working with him was still terrifying because size matters, weight matters, and when you're trying to wrestle someone who weighs as much as a motorcycle, something's going to give. Usually it's your spine. 2. Brock Lesnar, the freak of nature, WrestleMania. 30, April 6th, 2014, The Undertaker versus Brock Lesnar. Going into this match, The Undertaker had never lost at WrestleMania. 21 wins, 0 losses. The streak was the most sacred thing in wrestling. It was bigger than any title, more important than any storyline. It was the foundation of The Undertaker's legacy. The match was supposed to be a showcase. The Undertaker would overcome Lesnar, the streak would continue, and everyone would go home happy. But it went wrong almost immediately. Early in the match, Lesnar took The Undertaker down. It was a simple move, a basic amateur wrestling wrestling takedown. The kind of thing that happens in every match. But something happened. The Undertaker's head hit the mat wrong. Or maybe Lesnar came down on him too hard. Or maybe Calloway's body just couldn't handle it anymore. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. Massive concussion. From that point forward, The Undertaker doesn't remember the match at all. It's a complete blank. He said this multiple times in interviews. He doesn't remember losing the streak. He doesn't remember the finish. He doesn't remember the 3 count. He doesn't remember walking to the back. The concussion wiped it all out. He just remembers being afraid because Brock Lesnar isn't like other wrestlers. He's a former NCAA Division I wrestling champion. He's a former UFC heavyweight champion. He's a legitimate world-class fighter who could compete at the highest levels of real combat sports. He doesn't pull his punches. He doesn't slow down. He throws people with explosive force, and he's younger, faster, and stronger than almost anyone in the business. The Undertaker repeatedly called Lesnar a freak of nature, and he meant it. Lesnar is an evolutionary outlier, a genetic anomaly, the kind of athlete that appears once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime. And at WrestleMania 30, The Undertaker, at age 49 with a body held together by painkillers and sheer willpower, realized he couldn't keep up. This was the fear of mortality, the fear that you're not the Phenom anymore, the fear that you're just a man in his late 40s trying to hang with someone who could break you in half without breaking a sweat. The concussion proved it. The Undertaker's body betrayed him. His brain shut down from an impact that Lesnar delivered almost casually. And for the rest of the match, Calloway was operating on autopilot, relying on muscle memory and instinct while his conscious mind was offline. The streak ended that night, 21-1, and The Undertaker doesn't even remember it happening, but he remembers the fear of being in the ring with someone who was simply better, stronger, faster, more dangerous. The fear of being exposed as human when you've spent your entire career being a myth. Lesnar was the reality check, the force that proved The Undertaker was mortal, and that's the scariest thing of all. 1. Rey Mysterio, the smallest man who broke his face. This one is almost funny, because out of all the monsters, giants, and maniacs The Undertaker faced, the one who caused one of his worst injuries was Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio, the smallest wrestler in WWE. The guy who weighs maybe 175 pounds soaking wet. The guy who's 5'6" on a good day. The guy known for being one of the safest, most professional workers in the history of the business. In 2010, Mysterio and The Undertaker were wrestling on SmackDown. It was a standard match, nothing crazy, nothing extreme, just 2 professionals doing their jobs. Mysterio went for a seated senton, a move where he jumps off the top rope and lands sitting on his opponent's shoulders. It's a signature move. He's done it thousands of times. It's as safe as a wrestling move can be. But this time, Mysterio overshot. Instead of landing on The Undertaker's shoulders, his tailbone slammed directly into The Undertaker's face with the full force of gravity, with all 175 pounds concentrated into the smallest possible impact point. The Undertaker's nose shattered. The bone exploded. His orbital bone broke. Again, the same bone King Mabel had broken years earlier. Blood poured from his face. The match had to be stopped. The Undertaker later joked about it with his typical dry humor. Rey Mysterio's ass broke my nose. But it wasn't funny at the time. The injury was serious. The pain was incredible. And it proved something horrible. In wrestling, danger doesn't always look like a 500-pound giant. Sometimes it looks like a superhero. Sometimes the difference between a perfect move and a hospital visit is 2 inches. 2 inches higher, and Mysterio lands safely on the shoulders. 2 inches lower, and he hits the face. That's all it takes. 2 inches. Sometimes the safest wrestler in the world can still hurt you, because precision is fragile, because margin for error is razor thin, because even when everyone is doing everything right, physics doesn't care about your intentions. This was the fear of randomness, the fear of chaos, the fear that even when everything is going according to plan, it can still go catastrophically wrong. Rey Mysterio wasn't trying to hurt The Undertaker. He was trying to do the move perfectly, but he overshot by 2 inches and bones broke. That's wrestling. That's the reality of the job. You put your face in the path of someone else's body and you hope, you pray, that they land exactly where they're supposed to. And when they don't, you bleed. The Undertaker faced monsters who wanted to hurt him. He faced politicians who wanted to ruin him. He faced reckless giants who didn't know how not to hurt him. But Rey Mysterio, the safest man in the business, broke his face by accident. That might be the scariest thing of all. The Undertaker's career lasted 30 years. 3 full decades of tombstones, caskets, and lightning. 3 decades of being the most feared man in wrestling. The guy everyone else was supposed to be afraid of. But he wasn't fearless. He never was. He was afraid of childhood demons. He was afraid of gatekeepers who could end his career before it started. He was afraid of giants who could reject him with a single word. He was afraid of politicians who smiled while stabbing him in the back. He was afraid of clumsy monsters who could cripple him by accident. He was afraid of unstable geniuses who could destroy the business. He was afraid of friends who didn't care if they died. inside. He was afraid of physical tolls that ground him down. He was afraid of freaks of nature who proved he was mortal. He was afraid of perfect accidents that broke bones, but he kept walking to the ring anyway. That's the real legacy of The Undertaker. Not that he never felt fear, but that he felt it constantly, every single day, every single match, and he kept going anyway. The Deadman wasn't a ghost. He was a human being who spent 30 years pretending to be invincible while knowing he wasn't. A man who carried fears from childhood to retirement. A man who learned that the monsters aren't always the ones you expect. Sometimes the monster is a politician with a smile. Sometimes it's a genius with an ego. Sometimes it's a friend with no fear of death. Sometimes it's a 175-pound superhero who lands 2 inches too low. The Undertaker faced them all, and the fact that he was afraid, the fact that he knew how dangerous it all was, makes what he accomplished even more impressive. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's walking to the ring despite the fear. It's standing across from someone who terrifies you and doing the job anyway. For 30 years, Mark Calloway did exactly that. He was afraid, and he kept going. That's not being fearless. That's being brave. And that's scarier than any character he ever played. If this side of The Undertaker surprised you, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that dig up the truth behind wrestling's biggest icons.